The lantern above the porch barely cut the wind-driven dark when she reached the gate. Baby swaddled to her chest, coat soaked through. The ranch house stood alone on a sea of winter grass, boards sighing in the storm. She knocked once, heartbeat louder than her fist. The door opened without creak, and he filled the frame. Broad shoulders, eyes steady, silence deeper than the night. He stepped aside, offering nothing but space and the faint smell of wood smoke. She crossed the threshold, feet numbed, whispering a rasped, "Just till dawn." He nodded, closed the door, and bolted it as if sealing the cold on the outside forever. Inside, the hearth breathed a low orange glow. She unwrapped the child, tiny face pale with road dust, lips rooting for warmth. He fetched a kettle, filled it, set it on the iron, never once asking her name. While water hissed, she eased onto a bench, back to the wall, eyes tracking every movement. He laid dry blankets beside her, then vanished into another room. When he returned, he held a chipped mug of milk warm just past lukewarm. She tested it, then guided the nipple of a battered bottle into the child's mouth. The baby drank in frantic swallows, storm wind rattling the shutters in rhythm. She studied him by firelight. Stubble silvering, shirt patched at the elbow, a scar like a faded river across his forearm. Nothing about him betrayed motive, only a gravity of long quiet. Outside, thunder muttered. Rain hammered the roof boards. The baby finished, eyelids fluttering shut. She burped him with trembling palm, then tucked him beneath the blankets he'd offered. Steam lifted from wet cloth, smelling faintly of dust and lavender. He stoked the fire, sparks spiraling blue in the draft. She tried to thank him, voice snagging on exhaustion. He raised a hand, not dismissal, merely saying gratitude was unnecessary. From a cupboard he drew a loaf, cut 2 slices, smeared them with apple preserves as dark as garnet. He set one on the bench edge, moved to the corner, and lowered himself onto a straw mattress rolled beside the hearth. She waited a breath, then tore into the bread. Sweetness shocked her tongue. Tears pricked behind her eyes. The baby sighed, dreaming, tiny fist opening atop the blanket. Wind shifted, sleet turning to snow. Through a warped window pane, she saw a white swirl under the lantern. No hoofbeats. She allowed her head to fall against the wall, eyelids burning. Across the fire, he sat cross-legged, sharpening a knife with slow strokes, metal singing hushed. The rhythm lulled her heartbeat down from panic. When embers glowed low, he tossed another log. Flame roared, shadows fled. Near midnight, the child whimpered. She woke, heart thudding, but he was already beside the hearth warming a cloth. She blinked, trust balanced on knife edge, yet she passed the infant into his waiting arms. He wrapped the heated cloth round the tiny feet. The baby settled, lashes fluttering. She watched, breath held, as the stranger's big hands cradled life as though it could shatter from sound alone. He returned the child, retreated to his mattress, and closed his eyes. Dawn seeped gray under the door. Snow lay deep, drifts up to the porch rail. She rose, aching, muscles stiff, and found him outside, shovel carving paths between house, barn, and corral. Her boots crunched fresh powder as she stepped onto the porch. He paused, leaning on the handle, steam curling from his mouth. She lifted the baby snug in blankets, motioned toward the road invisible under white. He scanned the storm-blurred horizon, then shook his head. No stage today, maybe not for days. Her shoulders sagged. He pointed to the barn loft, then to the smokehouse. There was food, warmth, permission to remain. She followed him across the yard, every step a question answered by his silent stride. Inside the barn, hay stacked high held sun warmth, trapped from a lost season. He cleared a pallet in the loft, spread quilts thick, set a lantern nearby. The child cooed, fascinated by dust motes dancing in glow. She laid him down, breath fogging. The stranger descended, fetched a bucket of water from the pump, returned with a tin cup and a flannel. She washed road grit from the baby's skin, from her own trembling hands, felt layers of fear melt into straw and lantern light. Afternoon snow glittered silver. She ventured to the corral fence where he repaired a broken rail. She offered to hold the board. He passed her the hammer without hesitation. Nails bit wood, echoing across white silence. With each strike, something inside her settled, a rhythm of belonging she hadn't sought. When the rail stood firm, he touched its top, then met her gaze, a question in the lift of an eyebrow. Stay another night? She nodded, pulse singing relief. He returned the hammer to the toolbox and walked toward the house. She followed, baby cradled, snowflakes melting in the child's dark hair. Evening meal was potato stew laced with sage. They ate by lamplight while the wind calmed outside. She spoke 3 sentences: that she was headed west to her sister, that the baby's name was Eli, and that she had left a town whose streets forgot her the moment she turned a corner. He listened. Spoon paused midair and answered only with a soft, "You're safe here." It was the first full sentence he'd given her. Night fell quiet, stars brittle over the drifted yard. From the loft, she watched him cross to the pump, fill the trough for horses, pat each neck in turn. Moon edged over the ridge, lighting frost feathers on the rail he'd fixed. She held Eli close, heartbeat matching the child's slow breathing. The letter tucked in her sack, a plea for help that might never reach the sister, felt less urgent, its paper weight eclipsed by warmth under this roof. Below, the lantern in his window flickered once, then dimmed. She closed her eyes, hearing not the roar of miles still ahead, but the deep hush of one ranch house holding storm at bay. Tomorrow tracks might clear, coaches roll, roads beckon. Tonight silence wrapped 3 beating hearts, and the stranger's open door had turned one night into the first chapter of something that no longer felt like passing through. Snow sifted through a pale morning sky when Eli's first laugh bounced off barn rafters like a bell. Sharp, bright, impossible to ignore. She was stacking kindling by the stove. He paused in the doorway, arms full of feed sacks, and for the first time since she'd arrived, a smile cracked the stern line of his mouth. It startled her breathless. She had wondered what joy would look like on that weather-carved face. Now she knew it resembled sunrise breaking through a storm bank. The storm finally broke 2 days later. Drifts lingered, but the road emerged ribbon brown under weak sun. She packed her bag by instinct, letter tucked safe, baby bundled, boots laced. He watched from the threshold, fingers tightening on the mug he'd just filled. "Stage'll run by noon," he said, rough voice snagging. She nodded, but her pulse stumbled. Eli gurgled, grabbing her braid. The wagon's distant rattle reached them. Time catching up. She lifted the bag, but her feet glued to floorboards that smelled of soot and sage. His eyes held a mute question. Was grateful goodbye easier than asking her to stay? The wagon driver whistled up the lane, reins snapping. She stepped onto the porch, counting heartbeats, felt the chill bite through coat seams. The driver tipped his hat. "Room for 2. She hesitated, shifted weight. Eli burrowed against her chest, whined. Behind, the stranger cleared his throat. Words came out halting. "Storm turned the pass. Mudslides. Safer here till spring." She searched his face. The claim felt half true, half hope. She looked to the driver, saw impatience. Tracks still iced near the bend. She shook her head. "We'll wait." The driver shrugged, cracked reins, and rolled on. Silence pooled. She set the bag inside, closed the door, leaned back against it, breath shivering with a relief she had not let herself expect. He exhaled, shoulders dropping like he'd been holding a beam. Routine settled deeper. He showed her the ledgers kept with soldier-like precision. Grain in, feed out, each calf's birth notched in margins. She added a column: household stores, baby milk, seed for spring garden. Their handwriting intertwined across pages, 2 strangers' histories slowly stitching one ledger. Nights by lamplight they spoke more. Her name, Lena, finally given. His, Grant, spoken like an oath that nothing hurtful should follow it. He confessed the barn had stood empty since a fire took his sister and her 2 sons 5 winters back. The quiet after their absence had weighed like a millstone. She told of a salesman father buried in a county where debt collectors outnumbered mourners, of a mother gone before memory, of roads that kept offering escape yet never arrival. Grant listened, jaw clenched, grief in his knuckles as he folded the ledger shut. Eli grew plump on warm milk and barn air. He learned to grasp Grant's thumb, gum it, drool sliding onto calloused skin. The rancher's laughter, small, stunned, escaped each time and echoed off rafters like unseen birds finally flown home. She ventured to the corral fence where he repaired a broken rail. She offered to hold the board. He passed her the hammer without hesitation. Nails bit wood, echoing across white silence. With each strike, something inside her settled, a rhythm of belonging she hadn't sought. When the rail stood firm, he touched its top, then met her gaze, a question in the lift of an eyebrow. Stay another night? She nodded, pulse singing relief. He returned the hammer to the toolbox and walked toward the house. She followed, baby cradled, snowflakes melting in the child's dark hair. Evening meal was potato stew laced with sage. They ate by lamplight while the wind calmed outside. She spoke 3 sentences: that she was headed west to her sister, that the baby's name was Eli, and that she had left a town whose streets forgot her the moment she turned a corner. He listened, spoon paused midair, and answered only with a soft, "You're safe here." It was the first full sentence he'd given her. Night fell quiet, stars brittle over the drifted yard. From the loft, she watched him cross to the pump, fill the trough for horses, pat each neck in turn. Moon edged over the ridge, lighting frost feathers on the rail he'd fixed. She held Eli close, heartbeat matching the child's slow breathing. The letter tucked in her sack, a plea for help that might never reach the sister, felt less urgent, its paperweight eclipsed by warmth under this roof. Below, the lantern in his window flickered once, then dimmed. She closed her eyes, hearing not the roar of miles still ahead, but the deep hush of one ranch house holding storm at bay. Tomorrow tracks might clear, coaches roll, roads beckon. Tonight silence wrapped 3 beating hearts, and the stranger's open door had turned one night into the first chapter of something that no longer felt like passing through. Snow sifted through a pale morning sky when Eli's first laugh bounced off barn rafters like a bell. Sharp, bright, impossible to ignore. She was stacking kindling by the stove. He paused in the doorway, arms full of feed sacks, and for the first time since she'd arrived, a smile cracked the stern line of his mouth. It startled her breathless. She had wondered what joy would look like on that weather-carved face. Now she knew it resembled sunrise breaking through a storm bank. The storm finally broke 2 days later. Drifts lingered, but the road emerged ribbon brown under weak sun. She packed her bag by instinct, letter tucked safe, baby bundled, boots laced. He watched from the threshold, fingers tightening on the mug he'd just filled. "Stage'll run by noon," he said, rough voice snagging. She nodded, but her pulse stumbled. Eli gurgled, grabbing her braid. The wagon's distant rattle reached them, time catching up. She lifted the bag, but her feet glued to floorboards that smelled of soot and sage. His eyes held a mute question. Was grateful goodbye easier than asking her to stay? The wagon driver whistled up the lane, reins snapping. She stepped onto the porch, counting heartbeats, felt the chill bite through coat seams. The driver tipped his hat. "Room for 2. She hesitated, shifted weight. Eli burrowed against her chest, whined. Behind, the stranger cleared his throat. Words came out halting. "Storm turned the pass. Mudslides. Safer here till spring." She searched his face. The claim felt half true, half hope. She looked to the driver, saw impatience. Tracks still iced near the bend. She shook her head. "We'll wait." The driver shrugged, cracked reins, and rolled on. Silence pooled. She set the bag inside, closed the door, leaned back against it, breath shivering with a relief she had not let herself expect. He exhaled, shoulders dropping like he'd been holding a beam. Routine settled deeper. He showed her the ledgers kept with soldier-like precision. Grain in, feed out, each calf's birth notched in margins. She added a column: household stores, baby milk, seed for spring garden. Their handwriting intertwined across pages, 2 strangers' histories slowly stitching one ledger. Nights by lamplight they spoke more. Her name, Lena, finally given. His, Grant, spoken like an oath that nothing hurtful should follow it. He confessed the barn had stood empty since a fire took his sister and her 2 sons 5 winters back. The quiet after their absence had weighed like a millstone. She told of a salesman father buried in a county where debt collectors outnumbered mourners, of a mother gone before memory, of roads that kept offering escape yet never arrival. Grant listened, jaw clenched, grief in his knuckles as he folded the ledger shut. Eli grew plump on warm milk and barn air. He learned to grasp Grant's thumb, gum it, drool sliding onto calloused skin. The rancher's laughter, small, stunned, escaped each time and echoed off rafters like unseen birds finally flown home. Had stretched through seasons, turning passing strangers into a family neither had dared petition the stars for. And as the sky spilled silver, Eli asleep upstairs, Lena rested her head on Grant's shoulder. The porch boards creaked, and the silence between them glowed warm, stronger than promises, older than words, as enduring as the prairie wind. Grant woke before dawn to the tick of summer rain on cedar shingles and the soft weight of 3-year-old Eli sprawled across his chest, breathing deep as a lullaby. Lena lay beside them, hair spilled like ink across the quilt, one hand resting on Grant's forearm as if anchoring the moment. Outside, the first light ghosted the cottonwood leaves silver. Grant eased Eli onto the pillow, kissed the boy's curls, then slipped from bed, pulling on boots still dusted from yesterday's haying. Downstairs, he stoked the stove, set coffee to drip, and opened the ledger, a ritual now as sure as sunrise. Lena's neat columns listed flour, salt, 2 bolts of calico ordered from town. His own notes marked calf weight gains and the barrel of nails they still owed the blacksmith. He added a single line, July 14th, house frame finished. The sentence glowed on the page. After 2 summers living in loft and parlor, the new 2-room addition stood ready for paint. Lena descended with Eli on her hip, both in matching denim faded by wash and sun. She poured coffee, eyes bright despite the hour. Paint today? Grant nodded. Sky's holding. Eli clapped, delighted by any project that involved ladders and colored tins. They ate cornbread smeared with plum jam, then stepped onto the porch, breath catching at the view. Wheat heads nodded gold under a low mist, and in the distance a lone coyote loped across the rise, indifferent witness to their small miracle. They worked in companionable rhythm, Grant atop the ladder, rolling cream onto cedar siding, Lena below, stirring paint, wiping drips, pointing where sunlight exposed thin strokes. Eli toddled between them, holding a child's brush, dabbing the lower boards with stripes of accidental cheer. Wind carried the scent of fresh pigment blended with sage. By midday, 2 walls gleamed warm against the blue vault. Grant climbed down, brushed a streak of paint from Lena's cheek. She retaliated with a dab on his nose. Their laughter scattered a pair of sparrows from the eaves. In the lull before evening chores, Grant saddled the mare and rode the rutted track to town for mail and flour. Lena stayed to finish trim, Eli napping under the cottonwood. She hummed while the brush danced, thinking of how the house rose board by board like a hymn. First a refuge, now a declaration. When the last shutter shone perfect, she stepped back, heart tumbling with pride. A dust plume on the road announced Grant's return, but another darker column followed. A wagon, tarp flapped, bounced behind him, driven by a woman whose face was a sparrow's wing of nerves. He hailed Lena across the gate. "This is Mrs. Whitcomb. Lost her homestead to fire." The woman coughed smoke still lingering in her lungs, eyes red with recent ash. In the wagon bed, 2 frightened girls clutched a wool blanket. Their world folded to that narrow space. Lena's heart kicked. She opened the barn doors before Mrs. Whitcomb could ask, laid quilts in the loft near the cedar stars, and brewed sage tea. Grant hauled feed for the wagon horse, murmuring low reassurance. Silence held grief, but Sunrise Ben's wide hush now knew how to cradle pain. Night fell with thunder rumbling distant. After a supper of beans and skillet bread, Mrs. Whitcomb's daughters slept, tension uncoiling in their small limbs. Grant and Lena sat on the porch rail. He watched her study the barn, its warm glow spilling through gaps, and felt awe at how she transformed quiet hospitality into shelter for souls not her own. One night, she whispered, echoing years past. He squeezed her paint-stained fingers. And maybe another. Storm clouds broke at midnight. Rain marched across the tin, steady and cleansing. The next weeks wove new patterns. Mrs. Whitcomb traded mending for hay. Her oldest helped Lena transplant herb seedlings behind the smokehouse. The youngest shadowed Eli through puddles. The ranch hummed like a hive. 3 families bound by work and wordless understanding. Grant expanded the chicken pen. Lena drafted reading lessons beneath the cottonwood, using a broken board as chalk slate. But peace rarely rests long on the prairie. Late August heat baked the fields brittle. Distant plumes marked lightning spark fires creeping from canyon scrub. One cracked afternoon, Deputy Stone thundered up, eyes grim beneath soot bandana mask. The Whitcomb Claims Office had issued seizure papers. Without deed, Mrs. Whitcomb's land could be taken by any speculator. The family had 3 days to contest, but needed travel money, a witness, and proof of improvements, now reduced to cinders. Grant folded Stone's notice, jaw set. Nora caught his gaze, already reading his intent. They would ride at dawn. She packed documents, ledger pages showing Whitcomb livestock sales, sketches of the original cabin Mrs. Whitcomb drew from memory, signed by Grant as witness. At sunrise, Grant, Lena, Mrs. Whitcomb, and her eldest saddled up, leaving Eli and the younger girl in Stone's watchful care. The county seat lay 50 miles east, heat shimmering off Caliche Flats. Hoofbeats pounded rhythm to hurried heartbeats. They camped once under mesquite, traded swallows of tepid water, resumed. By dusk, courthouse pillars glared white-hot. Inside, a clerk sniffed at their sweat and dust until Mrs. Whitcomb laid coin for filing. Clay's savings slipped unseen from his palm to hers. Lena spread proof across the clerk's desk, voice steady, recounting every witness mark of the Whitcomb homestead. Grant signed affidavit. The clerk's scowl dimmed, replaced by grudging respect. They lodged in a stable loft. Grant dozed upright, rifle loose across knees. At dawn, Judge Halverson stamped the petition. Land held, restitution pending. Relief spread like cool water. They rode back slower, wind shifting cooler. Thunderhead Towers promised autumn's first break in heat. When Sunrise Bend crested the ridge, Eli's shout carried clear, and Grant's heart thudded with the homecoming he once thought he'd never crave. Harvest rolled golden. Mrs. Whitcomb found kin further north and departed with tears and jars of honey. Her daughters left painted stones by the porch step, tiny sunbursts, reminders of days safe. Sunrise Bend's population tucked back to Four Hearts, but its silence held more echoes now, comfortable, lived in. First frost spangled the barley, and Grant fixed the final shutter on the finished edition. That night they christened the new room. Lena pinned curtains she'd sewn from calico. Eli bounced on a real bed. Grant pressed a guitar chord beneath lamp glow. Outside, coyotes tested the edge of winter, but their howls sounded less lonely. Lena tucked Eli under quilt, then joined Grant on the porch. Stars wheeled cold and bright. She produced the old repaired mug, refilled with coffee. He lifted his own cup, tin, battered, unchanged. They toasted the hush in folding house, barn, fields. Tomorrow, she said, voice soft. Maybe fences north. He nodded. Plans no longer felt like chains, but stepping stones. Grant set his mug down, slipped an arm around her waist, and spoke in a rumble near her ear. You were passing through with nothing but a letter. Now the road passes through us. She turned, kissed the scar on his palm, a promise sealed with silence, warmer than all spoken vows. Morning came brittle, a scrim of ice on the water trough, the sun no more than a pale coin behind pearl-gray cloud. Grant's breath puffed white as he strode to the barn, boots knocking hoarfrost from cedar planks. Lena followed with Eli half sleeping on her hip, the boy's hair stuck to her coat from the chill. They checked the pregnant mare first, flanks drawn tight, breath quick, but the birth still held off. Grant stroked her neck, murmurs soft enough for only horse ears. Lena listened to the hush and felt winter's grip tighten. By noon, the sky darkened to gunmetal. A high, ragged wind swept dried grass into restless scribbles. Grant paused mid-task, scanning the ridge. A tiny silhouette on the wagon track, lurching. A rider? No. Someone on foot, staggering beneath a bundle. He swung into the saddle and loped out. Lena read the tension in his shoulders, settled Eli with a toy carved from last year's timber offcuts, then fetched blankets in the kettle. Certain rescue would return. Grant came back leading a buckskin lathered with cold sweat. Behind him, slumped forward in the saddle, a man hugged a blanket-wrapped infant. The stranger's face was gray-white, beard rhymed with frost. Found him 2 miles east, Grant said, voice low. Lost his wife last night birthing. Heading south, but the mare gave out. The man half collapsed as Grant lifted the bundle. Tiny, silent, frighteningly still. Lena took it without thought, pressing the stiff little body to her chest. Heat seeped from her coat. The baby's eyelids fluttered, released a faint mew. She felt her own knees weaken at the sound. They laid the father on the kitchen bench, stripped off his sodden coat. Fever striped his cheeks crimson. Names surfaced between shivers. Miles Garrett. The child, Clara. Grant added logs, the fire snapping awake. Lena warmed broth, coaxed spoonfuls past cracked lips. Outside, the wind howled, sleet spitting like gravel. There would be no moving on tonight, or any tomorrow. The ranch's quiet stretched to hold another crisis. Eli hovered near the cradle, curious. Lena bathed Clara in warm water scented with chamomile, noting ribs too sharp, skin too pale. She wrapped the infant in lamb's wool, held her under her own shawl until steady breathing returned. Grant brewed willow bark for Miles and sat through the night dabbing sweat, whispering the same silent encouragement Lena once heard when he wrapped Eli's feet with warm cloth. Storms rolled, days blurred. Miles drifted between fever dreams and guilt, murmuring about a sister on the far railroad spur, about debts chasing him like wolves. Grant answered only with tea and quiet presence. On the third dawn, Miles woke clear-eyed to Clara's squeaks. He tried to sit. Pain bent him double. Lena pressed him back. "You've got a bridge to rebuild inside you," she said, tone gentle but firm. He wept then, sound muffled in quilt folds. With each passing week, the ranch folded Miles and Clara into its rhythm. Grant added a cot in the loft. Lena rewrote the household ledger lines to stretch flour and beans. Miles insisted on chores, mending harness, chopping ice from troughs with limbs still shaking. Nights he told stories by lamplight, of the Red River flood, of a luthier father who believed every piece of wood held music. Eli sat wide-eyed. Lena watched Grant listen, unguarded. Early March sun teased puddles from snowdrifts, sap whispered under cottonwood bark. One evening, while Miles fed Clara, Grant handed him a small spruce plank. "Your father's trade. Show me." Miles's eyes flared. He traced grain with reverence, fetched a whittling knife, and by lantern glow coaxed rough curves of a fiddle's belly. Grant fitted a steam-bent frame. Lena carved tuning pegs during Eli's naps. Over weeks, the pieces married into a raw instrument, seams glued with pine resin. It lacked varnish, strings, voice, but it existed. A letter arrived via Deputy Stone. Miles's sister wrote from the rail spur in Carver Junction. She had a room, work waiting, begged him to come. Miles folded the page, stared at the half-finished fiddle. "I owe this roof more than nights and soup," he whispered. Grant shook his head. "You owe the world that girl singing." He nodded at Clara, plump now, fist curled around Eli's cast-off rattle. They outfitted Miles's wagon with fresh boards, a tarpaulin Grant had kept since cattle drives long ago. Lena stocked bread, jerky, dried apples. Grant lashed the half-fiddle safe in straw. Miles vowed to finish it once he earned the varnish. On departure morning, sky clear as polished tin, the mare stamped eager. Miles clasped Grant's hand, tears catching beard. "I'll send for you at harvest. Music and honey ode." He hugged Lena, leaving a scent of cedar shavings on her coat, then clicked the reins. Clara cooed at Eli one last time, and the wagon rolled onto the sun-dazzled track, ribbons of steam rising from thawing earth. Silence returned, softer, seasoned now by shared struggle. Grant and Lena stood shoulder to shoulder at the gate, watching dust settle. Eli tugged Lena's skirt, asking if the baby would remember. "She will," Lena said, voice sure. "Songs know their own names." They walked back toward the house, snowmelt trickling under fence rails. Grant caught Lena's hand, squeezed, then turned her palm upward. There, nestling beside the calloused lifeline, lay a slender silver key. "For your door," he murmured. She frowned. Every door already had a key. He guided her to the newest addition, paused before a plain pine panel opposite their bedroom. Unlocking it, he pushed the door wide. Morning sun spilled across a room empty except for a cedar chest, a rocking chair, and tall shelves waiting. He gestured at the blank walls. A place to keep every traveler's story. Lena stepped inside, breath catching at the scent of fresh sawdust and beeswax. She traced shelf edges, saw the ribbon sunburst stones, the first mug, all arranged with space for more. Grant said, "When you opened that first night, you carried nothing but Eli and a letter. You've since carried everyone else." She turned, tears stinging bright. He continued, "Thought you deserved a room to set burdens down." She crossed the room, wrapped him tight, felt his heartbeat ram against ribs. They stood locked in quiet thunder until Eli's laughter from the porch cut through, a shriek of joy chasing a runaway chick. Grant kissed Lena's forehead, then her lips, tasting salt and cedar. She answered with a fierceness only rooted love can carry. Outside, clouds drifted thin as parchment, sky horizon deep. Faint in distance, maybe memory, came the echo of wagon wheels, of music unborn. Sunrise Bend remained a dot on no map, but its silence traveled along every road stitched by those who stayed one night, then another, and left forever changed. And in the house of many keys, a new room waited, ready to cradle voices yet unheard, warmed by a hush that had learned to speak volumes without ever breaking. May unfurled with such gentleness it felt as if the prairie itself were catching its breath. Green, flooded pasture hollows, larks threaded liquid song through sunlit air, and Lena's new story room filled a little more each week. One shelf now held Miles's first postcard, Carver Junction printed small above a hand-inked fiddle sketch and 4 barley seeds taped beneath. Another shelf cradled Mrs. Whitcomb's thank you jar of peach preserves, the glass now a lantern whenever late light slanted just so. Grant carved plaques for each object, pine slivers branded with the date a life had paused at Sunrise Bend. Eli chased frogs along the creek these days, fleet as summer wind, while Samuel, 6, practiced letters in the dust with a crooked stick, calling to his mother for every triumph. Lena watched them from the porch, fingers playing absently with the silver key that never left her pocket. Grant joined her, wiping sweat from shingle work. He leaned on the rail, eyes soft. "Story room's near half full," he said. She smiled. "Stories stretch. We'll add shelves." He considered, then nodded toward the horizon. "Better add fences, too. Heard rail surveyors might sweep this side of the ridge." She tensed, recalling the last offer. Grant tipped his hat against sunlight. "We'll keep quiet as we do, but quiet is stronger with ready boards." That afternoon, they loaded cedar posts onto the wagon. Grant driving, Lena perched beside him, silver key catching motes of dust in its loop. They staked new boundary lines along the west rise while children tumbled in spring grass. Grant hammered each post with deliberate pulse. Lena set wire, muscles remembering cityless labor. By sundown, a fresh line glittered through tall wheat, silent yet sure. Sunrise Bend asserting gentle borders without closing any paths. June swept in hot and honey-scented. A coal-black thunderhead reared one dusk, dropping hail like spilled marbles. It shattered a window in the addition, tore fresh barley heads, and drove cattle against new fences. Grant and Lena worked side by side through the din. He rope-rigged a tarp to shield broken glass while she guided livestock back with calm voice and canvas. Hail turned to driving rain, pounding barn roofs until the boards shivered, but inside animals shifted with trust, their eyes reflecting lanterns that neither man nor woman let falter. When wind stilled, stars emerged as if nothing had broken. Grant surveyed damage. Glass shards, barley flattened, beehives toppled. Lena squeezed his hand. "We'll mend." The quiet of her certainty carried more power than the storm's roar. They salvaged hive boxes, discovering 2 still thrumming with life. Bees climbed Grant's sleeve without sting, as if the ranch's hush had taught them peace. Weeks later, a stranger rode in at sunrise, a lanky youth leading a mule laden with saddlery. He introduced himself as Caleb Ross, saddlemaker's apprentice gone adrift after his master's death. He offered repairs in trade for a night's rest. Grant studied the worn saddle on his own mare. Then the boy's raw-edged hunger and gestured to the barn. Caleb set up a bench, sewing shapes from scraps under the cottonwood, while Samuel and Eli watched wide-eyed. Each stitch pulled his story into Sunrise Ben's weave. Lena labeled a jar for his tale before dusk had cooled. Caleb stayed 3 nights, then a week, fitting harness with skill beyond his years. On the 8th morning, he approached Lena in the story room, hat twisting in calloused hands. "Ma'am, these shelves, you keep memories for passers-by. Might I leave something?" From a pouch, he withdrew a tiny brass concho engraved with a feather pattern. "My master's gift before he fell ill. Feels lighter here than in my pocket." She placed it on a maple hook, wrote the date, and thanked him. Caleb's shoulders eased. 2 days later, he saddled the mule, prepared to ride toward the distant stage route. Before leaving, he pressed a new leather strap into Eli's palms, miniature reins for frog-herding adventures. The boy squealed delight. Caleb grinned shyly, then disappeared down the dust line, his story room hook already gleaming. Mid-July heat shimmered silver. The pregnant mare finally foaled at dawn, sleek filly with a pale blaze. Lena leaned against the stall, tears unexpected, remembering her first step onto this property when Grant's silence was her only welcome. Now that hush rang with children's laughter, newborn knickers, bees and clover. Grant named the filly Chance, brushing her coat until it shone. Rail talk returned in August. Survey stakes crept down the ridge, white flags fluttering. Grant rode to meet Foreman Weller at the line. Words passed, measured, respectful. Weller admired the tidy fences, offered the lure of freight access. Grant shook his head but left space for courtesy. Returning, he told Lena, "They may skirt us by a mile. Quiet might hold." She exhaled, though part of her wondered if another traveler, steam whistle born, might one day need their door. She tucked that thought onto a future shelf. Harvest glowed amber, heavy with promise. Caleb returned with 2 friends, a blacksmith's widow seeking winter shelter, and an elderly tinker with stories older than iron. Sunrise Ben welcomed them, more hands for threshing, more tales for shelves. One late night, after cider and bluegrass rhythms tapped on tin, the widow asked Lena how a place so quiet could feel so alive. Lena answered, voice hushed, "Because Grant's silence taught mine to sing." October gifted them a comet, tail blazing emerald across indigo sky. All souls on the ranch stood in cool stubble, eyes sky-tipped, even beehives silent. Eli tugged Grant's sleeve. "Will it stay?" Grant crouched, cradled the child. "All travelers move on, but their light can linger." He glanced at Lena. Her cheeks glowed comet green, and he saw reflected in her eyes every stranger who had left a brightness on their shelves. On first frost morning, Grant unlocked the story room to add Caleb's second gift, a hand-tooled bridle for Chance, stamped with SB entwined by the same feather pattern. Shelves brimmed, notes scribbled, stones painted, a single broken fiddle string. He realized they'd need a second story room soon, or perhaps the whole house was turning into one. Each board resonating with voices, each nail humming earlier footfalls. In the hush he turned, found Lena watching, silver key around her neck catching dawn light. He crossed the room, rested his forehead against hers. "One night stretched long," he whispered. She responded, breath warm. "Let it stretch forever." Outside, Chance pranced across frost-glittered pasture, Eli chasing with leather reins aloft, Samuel ringing Mrs. Avery's brass lark bell. The prairie wind caught the sound, carried it past new fences, over survey stakes, into distance. Somewhere a traveler might pause, hearing warmth in a bell note, and follow it down a road toward a gate and a door that opened without questions, only silence warmer than words.